My name is Susan. I'm 41 years old, and I can confidently say that I am happy with my life. It hasn't always been easy, but after everything I've been through, I finally have peace. I have a stable job that I enjoy, a beautiful home that I built through my own hard work, and most importantly, I have my daughter, Emily. She's my greatest accomplishment, my reason for everything. I raised her on my own, and today, she's a smart, independent young woman with a bright future ahead of her. I want to tell you a story about the biggest mistake I ever made and how I found the strength to fix it before it was too late. This isn't a story about regret, because I don't regret leaving my ex-husband, Eric. What I regret is staying as long as I did, waiting, hoping things would get better. Because the truth is, the man I married wasn't the man I thought he was. When I met Eric, he was charming, too charming, in hindsight. He knew exactly what to say, how to make me feel special, like I was the most important person in his world. We got married quickly, maybe too quickly. I was young, in love, and I thought I had found my forever. But after the wedding, things began to change. Or maybe they had been there all along, and I just hadn't seen it yet. At first, it was little things. He stopped putting in effort. He would come home from work, drop his bag by the door, and immediately sink into the couch, acting as if he carried the weight of the world. Meanwhile, I was the one managing everything, working, cooking, cleaning, and taking care of Emily. If I ever asked him to help out, "I work all day, Susan. What do you do? Just sit around the house?" It didn't matter that I worked just as much as he did. In his mind, my job wasn't as demanding, and keeping the home together was my responsibility alone. Then he started drinking. At first, it was just a few beers on the weekend. Then it became a regular thing. Friday nights turned into entire weekends with his friends. "It's just a few drinks, Sue. Relax." But it wasn't just a few drinks. It became late nights, forgetting to call, spending money we didn't have. It was me, lying awake, wondering when he'd come home. And then things got worse. Eric had a temper. At first, it was just frustration, impatience. Then he started raising his voice. And then things started getting broken. And then one night, during one of our arguments, he grabbed my arm so tightly that I had bruises for a week. I should have walked away then, but I stayed because I thought things would get better, because I thought he would recognize what he was doing, because I believed that deep down, he was still the man I had married. I convinced myself that it was just stress, just a rough phase, that with time, things would settle down. But then came the night that changed everything. It was late. Eric had been out, as he often was. I was home with Emily, who was only 5 at the time. She had fallen asleep beside me, her little arms wrapped around me like she always did when she felt uneasy. The front door swung open. I knew, even before I saw him, that something was wrong. He stumbled into the living room, knocking things over as he muttered to himself. His voice was uneven, his words sharp and irritated. Emily stirred beside me, blinking awake. She gripped my shirt and whispered, "Mommy, I don't like it when Daddy comes home like this." Something inside me shifted. I wasn't just thinking about myself anymore. I was thinking about her. What kind of life was this for her? What kind of memories would she carry of her father? Was she going to grow up thinking that this was just how things were supposed to be? That night, I didn't argue. I didn't try to reason with him. Instead, I packed a bag. I took Emily and we left. We drove straight to my parents' house, and when my mother opened the door, she took one look at me and didn't ask a single question. She just hugged me and said, "It's about time." That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going back. And Eric? He didn't realize it yet, but he had just lost everything. The first few days after I left were overwhelming. I stayed at my parents' house, trying to process everything, trying to keep things as normal as possible for Emily. She was too young to understand all the details, but she knew something was different. "Are we ever going home?" she asked one night as I tucked her into bed. I hesitated before answering, "We are home, sweetheart," because that's exactly how it felt. Safe, steady, warm, a place where I didn't have to constantly wonder what mood Eric would be in, where I didn't have to tread carefully around my own home. At first, Eric didn't take my leaving seriously. The first night, he called me. His words were slurred, his tone casual, almost amused. "Susan, this is ridiculous. Come home. Stop overreacting." I let out a breath and hung up. The next night, he called again, more persistent this time. "What do you think you're doing? You can't just take my kid and leave." His voice had an edge, frustration creeping in. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. "She's my kid too, Eric," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Yeah? Then bring her home. She's supposed to be here. You're supposed to be here." There was no apology, no self-reflection, just demands. I hung up again. Days turned into weeks, and something shifted. Eric started realizing that I wasn't coming back. He had never believed that I would really leave. I had threatened it before. I had packed bags, stormed out, driven to my parents' house in the past, but I had always gone back. This time, I wasn't going back, and it hit him harder than he expected. At first, he tried to act like he didn't care. He told his friends that I was being dramatic. He told them I was just teaching him a lesson, and that I'd come crawling back once I realized I couldn't handle being a single mom. But the cracks started to show. I heard from mutual friends that he was drinking even more than before, that he was missing work, showing up late and hungover, that his boss had already warned him twice about his behavior. Then one night, he called me again. It wasn't angry this time. It was desperate. "Susan, I miss you." For the first time in years, his voice didn't sound like a man trying to win an argument. It sounded like a man who knew he had already lost. "I miss Emily. I miss our life. I don't know what to do." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tightly. I wanted to say something kind. I wanted to tell him I missed the good times too. But then I remembered all the nights I stayed awake, waiting for him to come home. I remembered all the times he made me feel small, invisible, like I was nothing more than a convenience. I remembered Emily whispering that she didn't like it when Daddy was like this. And just like that, the softness was gone. "You did this, Eric," I said. "Not me." There was silence on the other end. "I can fix it," he finally said. "Then fix yourself," I told him, "because we're not coming back." And for the first time since I had left, he didn't argue, because deep down, he knew it was true. But knowing it and doing something about it, those were two very different things. And Eric was about to find out just how much he had lost. Eric didn't fix himself, not right away at least. Instead, he fell apart. At first, he still tried to pretend that everything was normal. He told himself that I was just angry, that I needed space, that eventually I would get over it and bring Emily back home. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks stretched into months, he started realizing the truth. I wasn't coming back. I had gotten a new apartment, a small but cozy place for Emily and me. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it was ours. A place free from shouting, free from tension. A place where Emily could play and laugh without fear of waking up her father on the couch. And as I started rebuilding my life, Eric was destroying his. I heard from mutual friends that his drinking had gotten worse. He wasn't just going out on weekends anymore. He was drinking on weekdays, after work, sometimes even during lunch. His performance at work started slipping. He had always gotten by doing the bare minimum, showing up, putting in just enough effort to avoid being noticed. But without me at home keeping things together, his life became a mess. He started showing up late. Then he started not showing up at all. One night, I got a call from an old coworker of his, someone who had always been friendly with both of us. "Susan, I don't know if you want to hear this, but Eric's in trouble. His boss is on the verge of letting him go." I wasn't surprised. "What happened?" I asked. "He showed up to work drunk last week." I let out a slow breath. "They didn't fire him?" "They should have, but I think they felt bad for him. They gave him one last warning, but Susan, everyone knows it's only a matter of time." And sure enough, a month later, he lost his job. By the time I heard about it, he was already spiraling. The drinking got worse. The money started running out. He tried calling me again, not to apologize, not to ask about Emily, but to ask for help. "Susan, His voice was hoarse, slurred. "I just need a little help, just until I get back on my feet." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone. "You want my help?" I said. "Where was your help when I needed it, Eric?" Silence. No, I cut him off. "You don't get to ask me for anything. You don't get to crawl back and expect me to clean up the mess you made." He let out a shaky breath. "Susan, please." "Fix yourself, Eric," I said, the same words I had told him before. And this time, I hung up first. I stared at my phone for a long time after that, not because I was tempted to call him back, but because, for the first time, I didn't feel guilty, because I finally understood he had done this to himself. He had lost everything. Me, Emily, his job, his stability, and the worst part, he had no one to blame but himself. Months passed, and life moved forward, for me at least. Emily and I had settled into our new normal. She was happier, more relaxed. She started doing better in school, laughing more, playing more. It was like a weight had been lifted off her tiny shoulders, a weight she had been too young to understand but had felt all the same. For the first time in years, I felt free. I didn't have to walk on eggshells anymore. I didn't have to worry about a drunk husband stumbling through the door at 3 a.m. I didn't have to wonder when the next explosion of anger would come. I had peace. And Eric had nothing. After losing his job, he struggled to find another one. His drinking had become a full-blown problem, and in his industry, where networking and reputation were everything, word had gotten around. No one wanted to hire a man who had been let go for showing up drunk. His finances started crumbling. He had always relied on me to manage the bills, to make sure everything was paid on time, to cover for his bad decisions. Without me, he started missing rent payments. Then came the eviction notice. I found out through a mutual friend that he had moved in with an old drinking buddy, crashing on a couch in a run-down apartment with no real plans to get his life together. Emily stopped asking about him. At first, after we left, she would still bring him up. "When will I see Daddy? Does Daddy miss me? Why doesn't Daddy call?" But as time passed, she stopped waiting for his calls. She stopped expecting anything from him. And that, more than anything, was his real punishment. He had lost his daughter, not because I had taken her away, but because he had made himself irrelevant in her life. One day, about a year after I left him, my phone rang. It was Eric. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" His voice was hollow, tired, older somehow. "Susan? What do you want, Eric?" He was silent for a moment. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry." I closed my eyes, taking a slow breath. "For what exactly?" "For everything," he sighed. "For the drinking, for how I treated you, for not being there for Emily. I don't know why I let things get so bad. I didn't say anything. I lost everything, he continued. And I know it's my fault. I don't know how to fix it. I finally spoke. Eric, some things can't be fixed. Some things you just have to live with. Do you think Emily will ever want to see me again? I thought about it, about all the nights she had cried because of him, about the way she had stopped asking for him, about how, in her world, he had already disappeared. That's not for me to decide, I said finally. That's up to her. But if you ever want to be in her life again, you need to fix yourself first. Another long silence. I don't know if I can. Then that's your answer. I didn't wait for him to say anything else. I ended the call, and for the first time since leaving him, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no regret, because Eric had punished himself far more than I ever could. And I was finally, truly free. Life after Eric felt like stepping into the sunlight after years in the dark. At first, I thought it would take me a long time to heal, to get used to being on my own. But the truth was, I had been alone for years, long before I ever left him. The difference now? I didn't have to carry the weight of his failures anymore. Emily and I built a life without him. I got a promotion at work, something Eric had always brushed off as not a big deal. But it was. It meant stability, independence, security for Emily and me. I bought a new car, one that I chose, one that was safe, reliable, and mine. I made new friends, reconnected with old ones, and for the first time in years, I felt like Susan again. And Emily, she thrived. She made new friends at school. She joined a dance class. She laughed more, slept better. She wasn't afraid of loud noises in the house anymore. She wasn't worried about her father coming home angry. One day, out of the blue, she asked me, "Mom, are you happy now?" I smiled, pulling her into a hug. "I really am, sweetheart." And I was. Meanwhile, Eric was still stuck in the same downward spiral. A year after our last conversation, I heard from a mutual acquaintance that he had moved to another state. He couldn't afford to stay here anymore, she told me. No job, no place to live. He just packed up and left. It wasn't surprising. He had nothing holding him here. No family, no job, no daughter. Emily had long since stopped asking about him. She had grown up knowing that her mother showed up, that her mother kept her safe, that her mother chose her over everything else. And Eric? He had proven over and over again that he couldn't do the same. So she let him go, and so did I. I didn't keep tabs on him. I didn't wonder what he was doing, because at the end of the day, his downfall was his own doing. And I had finally built the life I deserved. To every woman out there who feels trapped, who feels like she has to stay, has to endure, has to keep fixing a man who refuses to fix himself, you don't. You don't owe anyone your happiness, your safety, your peace. The best thing I ever did was leave. And if you're in the same position wondering if you should go, I hope you do too. If there's one thing I've learned from my experience, it's that men like Eric don't change. They just get better at hiding who they really are. Looking back, I see all the red flags I ignored, all the warning signs that should have made me run. But when you're in love, when you want to believe you found the right person, it's easy to make excuses. So, if you're listening to this and wondering, could I be walking into the same trap? Here's what I wish someone had told me. 1, they're charming. Too charming. Eric knew exactly what to say to make me feel special. He moved fast. Too fast. We were serious before I even had time to really think. That's how they trap you. They sweep you off your feet, love bomb you, make you feel like the most important person in the world. And then, once they know you're hooked, the mask starts to slip. 2, they push boundaries just to see if you'll let them. The first time Eric yelled at me, he apologized right after. He made it sound like it wasn't a big deal. I was just frustrated, Susan. You know I didn't mean it. I forgave him. Then the next time he yelled a little louder, and when I called him out, he turned it back on me. Well, maybe if you didn't nag me so much, I wouldn't get upset. And so it began, a slow, steady shift where he made me question if I was the problem. 3, they isolate you. Eric never said, I don't want you to see your family. That would have been too obvious. Instead, it was, why do you always run to your mom every time we have a fight? Your friends don't understand our relationship. They just fill your head with nonsense. You should spend more time with me. I'm your husband, not them. And little by little, my world got smaller. 4, they don't respect your time, your needs, or your independence. Eric never saw me as an equal. He thought his job mattered more than mine. His stress was more important than mine. His needs always came first. And when I asked for help, you should be grateful I'm working all day. What do you even do? If someone dismisses your needs, your feelings, your efforts, run. 5, they make you think leaving isn't an option. By the time I realized how bad things were, Eric had convinced me that leaving him would be worse than staying. No one else would put up with you. You won't make it without me. You think being a single mom is easy? Good luck. And for a while, I believed him. Until the day I didn't. Until the day I realized that the only thing worse than leaving was staying. So if you see these signs, if you feel that knot in your stomach, if you're waiting for proof that things will get worse, this is your proof. Men like Eric don't change. But you have the power to walk away. And I hope you do.